Welcome everyone to another episode of Indie Hangout. I am Pneumatics. You may know me over on YouTube or over on Twitch if you add an extra X to the end. I am of course joined by my amazing co-host and a guest dev, but we'll go ahead and let Maz introduce him. So first of all, Kronos and Maz.
How's it going, everybody? OSOK Kronos here. You can find me over on Twitch and YouTube at OSOK Kronos.
What's going on, guys? Maz from MazTech Gaming. MazTech Gaming over on YouTube, MazTech_gaming over on Twitch, MazTech_gaming VODs on YouTube as well. Exciting day, guys. Another month, 21 episodes in. We've been meeting some really cool people over the past few months. I think you guys would agree with that. And here
Absolutely.
we are. Yeah, here we are with another developer. This is a game called Madhouse. And I had the pleasure of playing this on my stream a couple of weeks ago. And the developer himself joined us for that stream. It's going to be... Actually, at the time of this recording, it would be tomorrow is when the showcase will release on the channel. But I wanted to introduce the developer here, Paul Hubens. Paul, welcome to Indie Hangout. Tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a brief scenario of your game. Give us a summary of your game.
Hey guys, well thanks so much for having me. My name is Paul Hubens. I go as Fubens online. I'm working on a game called MADHOUSE, which is like a retro-styled top-down action-adventure RPG shooter versus it's kind of two games in one with a horror theme. So I'm really excited to tell you guys about it today.
Well, definitely excited to hear you talk about it. I mean, I really enjoyed it when I played it. I like that a lot of people nowadays are kind of like, oh, the language is harsh. I love that kind of thing. I love when we can have a story that's just completely out there. And it was a kind of a shocking beginning. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I usually like to play these games blind, Paul. Boy, am I glad I did, because it was like, okay, what just happened at the very beginning? And we won't talk about that. No spoilers, because we want people to go and wishlist this. We want people to go and play the demo for themselves. But it was a lot of fun for sure.
I'm so glad you liked it. I mean, I'm really looking forward to catching like the first part of you playing it, because I was late to your stream, so I didn't actually catch you playing that part and seeing you react to it, but I'd love to check that out. And yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Me, Kronos, and Maz all got to play the demo before, of course, this recording, and I got the same vibe from it. I was like, holy crap, a lot that goes down. And I love it when games put things in there that you yourself wish they would have done, like just the reactions. You're like, yeah, that's a pretty legit reaction to that, and I love that yours does that.
Thanks, guys. I'm glad you all got to check it out. And yeah, the content is definitely pretty in your face at times, and there's some stuff I've struggled with myself even in there that I just wasn't sure if I wanted to kind of, I guess, make it a little more toned down for a bigger audience, but it's kind of really leaning into its edginess since it takes place in the 90s. So I'm just kind of doubling down with some of that stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Maz, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, one thing that you said during the stream, Paul, that kind of stood out was that you said that this is actually a remake of a game that you developed about 20 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the original game I created in 2004 with Game Maker, and I developed it for about 3 years until I stopped working on it in 2007. And it was, it was a pretty minor indie cult hit on, a Game Maker forum. And back in 2019, I decided, I just want to try to reimagine this. I want to finish it, and I want to give it because these characters and these stories have been in my head for like almost 20 years now, and I just felt like I never really, looking back on the original game, it was so rough by comparison. If you go on itch, you can find the original, but this one is just better in every possible way.
That's great. And I'm glad that you're coming back to it. It's a lot of fun. So, kind of backing up a little bit, what inspired you to get into indie game development then? And how was your background shaped the way you approach projects like Madhouse? I mean, it's nice to know that, after 20 years, you're making this come to fruition. But what is it, what is it that got you what inspired you to make Madhouse? What inspired you to become an game developer?
That's funny because when I originally got into like game design and development, the term indie wasn't even really a thing yet. I've been really interested in this stuff since I was a kid. I'm 44, so I was probably around 8 years old, back in 7 or 8 years old in 1988 when I was first inspired by playing Zelda on the original Nintendo. And ever since then, game development just kind of consumed me. I wasn't always doing it digitally. That wasn't until like the early 2000s, but I've always been making games in some capacity, even if it was just on paper throughout my life.
That's awesome. I mean, another Zelda fan. For
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Love the classics, and I think you guys might see some of that inspiration in Madhouse.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely felt
Yeah.
that. I find that a lot of games that are being made, and I believe that, that is also Game Maker. You're still using Game Maker, correct?
Yeah,
That
that's
seems-
right. I've been working with Game Maker now for over 20 years, so that's the only thing I use, and that's the only thing I'm comfortable using. So
There you go. And it seems like a lot of games that kind of have that link to the past feel, or top-down Zelda games, seem to come from that. There's another game that we've been playing most recently, Under the Island, which is put out by Slime King Games, and that is also done on Game Maker. And I feel a lot of similarities as far as the controls go, if you will, which I thought was pretty cool.
yeah, I think Game Maker is just a really great tool for people that want to pick up and start learning how to make games. Because when I started with it, it had this like drag and drop interface, so it was really easy to understand how the logic of the code worked. And then later on, I just started actually doing the scripting with it, and it made a lot of sense to approach it more from that visual angle first, because I'm not really like a programmer essentially, but now I can do it well enough to make games like Madhouse at least.
So as an indie dev, like, what's one of the biggest challenges you faced when like bringing this game to realization, like, from a concept in your head to like making it where it's real and playable?
So I think the biggest challenge for me personally is, with the exception of music, I'm a solo developer, so I'm designing the game, I'm writing the story, I'm doing all the art assets, which is a bunch of pixel art for various characters and animations, and I'm doing the level design and doing the code and play testing it, and then on top of that I'm supposed to market it too, which I don't really do a lot of, but it's just a lot of stuff for one person, and I'm more of a content driven designer, so I like to make games that have a lot of content and variety in the world, and that can be a little bit of a detriment to me because creating a bunch of content is also a lot of work. So yeah, that's probably the biggest hurdle in my development process, is just the fact that I like to make a lot of content and I'm one guy doing it. So
Kind of
love-
wanting to like, oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Oh,
Nick.
you go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna say I get that, like wanting to keep a lot of stuff in the game and make it longful, like longevity of it too. So I could imagine that would take some time.
yeah, it definitely takes a lot.
Man, I love that. The more you talk, the more I'm like, how similar are we right here, right now, as Maz and Kronos know? So if you didn't know, I'm also a solo developer, and it's really cool to be talking with another solo developer. And funny enough, I started out with RPG Maker as well. I didn't make anything out of it. It's really nice hearing from you, and your perspective of it as well is something that really got you into it, And
Yeah, no, I think these tools are really awesome for like hobbyists, and professionals alike. It's funny because before Game Maker, I actually I tried making a game with a program called AVGS, I think it was called, Adventure Game Studio, or AGS. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one, but it's for like making point and click adventure games.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't heard of that one. Did mess around with a little engine called Perlenspiel, and it's literally like the most basic a tiny game maker engine you could think of. And I was like so blown away when I messed around with that one, and it was just to mess around with. I thought it would. I don't know if you feel the same, but like when I first got into game dev, all I was like, if I could just make this race car go around a track, I feel accomplished. I did something great,
Yeah, definitely. Like I think that game development is an extremely rewarding thing because you have like an idea in your head and then you create it, and then suddenly an idea that only existed in your mind is now something that other people can experience, and just seeing those things come to life in like a physical to exist in our reality is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to ask you now, how do you balance your creative vision with practical constraints? Being a solo dev, you're dealing with your time management, if you have any kind of budget within it. Like if you're like me, I try to keep that as low as possible with only having a music artist help me out. And it's really, for me, it's been real hard. I want to know your perspective as well with your game so far and how you've been able to handle all of that.
Yeah, so as far as time goes, like this is like my core focus in life. Like I actually have to like set aside time for other things, like having social things with my friends. I'll like kind of tear myself away from it just to do that, just to like be a normal person, I guess. But like as far as when I get into like really into development, like I will usually start working on it from like the minute I get up to the minute I go to sleep, and I'll do that every single day. And like I surprisingly don't get burnout doing that because it's what I'm passionate about. And so basically, like, I don't have to build game development around my schedule. It's more that my schedule is built around game development, my project. And I do have a day job, so that's kind of like what I do to pay the bills, and I have like income coming in from, some other sources, which might get into in a minute. But basically, like, I just work on this when I'm free, and I kind of make sure that my time is devoted to this primarily, and then everything else just kind of comes secondary. As for the budget, this is like a $0 budget. Like I mean, unless you count like me paying rent and feeding myself, there's no money that goes into this except for I did spend some money to make stickers that I gave out to like help market the game. And I also, the cost of submitting it to Steam was like $100, stuff like that, or putting like $50 to $100 on like a video that I might post on social media just to give it that extra reach. But there's not a lot of money spent on the development itself because, I already own Game Maker, or I already have a license for that. I think that was like $100 when I got it. And so like other than that, I'm not like contracting people for anything. The guy that's doing the music, he's gonna get like a cut of sales, but like he's not working. I'm kind of, we can get it more into that later when, if we talk about that, but it is on a $0 budget essentially.
Nice. That is awesome, man. Very, very cool. Definitely something that helps out big time so that you're not constrained in some way. It really is just depending on the time you have. And it seems that, it's very awesome to hear that you have time devoted to just work on this, and definitely understand that whole burnout point. That can be something that happens. But as Maz has pointed out, and Kronos and me throughout a lot of our episodes, is that we always point out that, as indie devs, it's a passion project. So more than likely, it's just something you're so passionate about that you don't feel like it's work, you want to get up to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's 100% right.
And I'm sorry, I totally misspoke. I said RPG Maker, and you are actually working with Game Maker.
Yeah, that's right. It's called Game Maker Studio now, but when I originally started working with it, it was just called Game Maker. It was developed by Mark Overmars, and then it was bought out by Yo-Yo Games. So now it's a Yo-Yo Games product, and it's actually Game Maker Studio 2 that I work in right now.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. I heard that and I'm like, oh crap, I messed it up. I wanted to go ahead and clear that up with all our listeners right now. So, but yeah, no, good stuff, man. Good stuff. All right. So now clearing that up, I should probably dive into, are there any other engines and tools that you like or that you prefer when you're making like pixel art games in general with the RPG elements, and why?
Yeah, so, Game Maker is the primary tool that I use, but the secondary tool that I would say I use is probably just Photoshop because I've been working with Photoshop for over 20 years now as well, so I'm comfortable with making my pixel art in there. I know there's better tools for doing pixel art and animations, like I think Ace Sprite is one that gets mentioned a lot.
Oh, yeah.
but I do like manual animations, and then I test them in Game Maker to see how they look, and then I just go back and tweak them. I don't do a lot of pixel art rendering in Game Maker, although I think their tools are fine. I just like the sort of flexibility that Photoshop has for that. As for other tools, I do sometimes use a program called Tiled to just kind of roughly lay out my level designs, and then I kind of just have to like rebuild it in Game Maker. What I usually do is I build the level layout in Tiled just because it's a little easier to work with, and then I'll just kind of like export that as like an image, and then I'll just put the elements over top where they need to go. But I've streamlined it a little bit going forward because I'm basically using Tiled to just export images as my backgrounds, as opposed to using just like tile set based images. Even though Tiled gives you this tile set sort of image, the image is just one whole image for the background, and then the interactive objects are kind of going over top of that. And if I need certain things to have depth, then I can assign like a depth variable to them. Other than that, I use a program called SFXer. I don't think it's supported anymore, but there's an online version called JSFXer, and I use that for all my sounds. All you do is you just basically slide little sliders and until you get the sound you want. And I think that works well for Madhouse because it uses like these lo-fi sounds. And if I need to do any further editing to them, I just go and use Audacity, which is a free audio program. And it's, as far as, sometimes I don't know if you guys got a chance to see the multiplayer, but there's you should definitely check that that out if you get a chance. But the characters, when you select them, they have different like voice lines, and I just do the voice lines in like Audacity for that, basically.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. That is really cool. It's always good using free software to help you out as well. Yeah, I have heard of tile sets. It's really cool that you're using something like that. I've never tried that out. And dude, props to you for doing the animations manually. It's such a pain. It's I use a sprite. So, and as with anything, that learning the software is one thing, and then trying to actually use it for what you need is another. And it's a lot for one person to handle.
Yeah, that's kind of why I stick with like what I know, even though it might not be the best way of doing it. It's what's the most familiar to me, so that makes it faster and more efficient, I guess. Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'd agree with that.
That's very cool. Absolutely. I've got another question here for you, Paul, as well. It's like indie games, they often rely on community feedback, right? So how is player input from events like Steam Next Fest or going into people's streams influence your development process? And, when we are kind of giving feedback, we always want to be constructive about it. And one of the things that we kind of pointed out early on, and you actually even acknowledged it before I even said anything in the stream, was the ability to access settings and adjust, you have your sliders to adjust the audio and whatnot. But how does that influence your development process overall?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I've gotten a lot of feedback from like the Steam events, because I'm not sure if I was Madhouse in Next Fest, because I don't recall submitting it, but I think it was in some it was like a zombies and vampires thing. But I don't think I got a lot of feedback from that. And on social media, people just tend to like or sometimes repost or share your stuff, but I don't really. I think the most feedback I get is probably from my Madhouse Discord server that I set up. I did get a lot of people to join that, but I'm sure you guys know that when you have a Discord server, there's only going to be like a few active people in there when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my
yeah,
God.
so
Yes.
I think people just tend to join Discord servers and then mute them, essentially. But I feel like, I get a lot of feedback from them, and as well as other teams that I've worked with on other projects. And it's always valuable, and I do try to listen to every piece of feedback. I don't always take feedback graciously, I guess, because there's some things that if people come with a sharp criticism, I might push back against it a little bit. I do try to think about it, and I do try to make sure that the game is at least appealing from like a gameplay point of view.
100%. And you're right. It's how you deliver that type of feedback, and is it really constructive? And no, you were not in Next Fest. I know that, and of course you know that. I was just using that as an example of different types of events. But yeah, it's always good. And yeah, I agree with you on the Discord thing. I actually call it my people collector.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, change my mind.
Hey, you're not wrong, man. You're not wrong.
It's all the lurkers.
The lurkers. We bring the lurkers.
So I got a question for you. Keaton, marketing an indie horror game has been known to be kind of tricky because it's so many games in that genre, so like a lot of people need a bigger budget. What's like some strategies you've tried for like building up hype leading up to the early access launch?
So to be completely honest, as I kind of touched on this before, like I have not been doing much of a great job with marketing this game. I did post a Steam page trailer when the demo launched, and I did try to like get engagement across like X and YouTube and TikTok, but my reach on those platforms, despite having like a decent amount of followers on some of them, like it just isn't that great, and you kind of have to pay to play these days with that, and I just think that's a little unfortunate, but I get it. These are platforms where you're using a service, and they ultimately want you to pay to get your stuff seen. I feel like I could definitely be doing more in that regard, so it's an area that needs a lot of improvement, I would say. I like I said, I just don't think that I'm doing a great job of marketing. I think that I do have things planned, but it's very hard to find the time to properly market it outside of development, because development takes up so much of my time that like to properly market it, I'd have to like do a lot of video editing and stuff like that. And it's just something that like I don't feel like I have the time for, even though I should definitely be thinking about that stuff more. I do have maybe a couple times a year I throw these MADHOUSE parties. I usually throw one on my birthday and around Halloween, because the game is kind of like a Halloween-y type thing. And I do like tournaments, but those are just like local friends really, and that's when I passed out the stickers and stuff like that. But I really want to try to reach a broader audience with it. I live in Pittsburgh, so I saw that there was a Pittsburgh Game Festival coming up, and I did submit an application to that. I haven't heard anything back yet. That's happening in early October as well. So I'm hoping that they're going to accept me there and I can set up the game and show it off. But stuff like that, I'm going to try to branch out more. I think once this push to get it into early access and launched in early October is over with, I'm going to treat it more like a marathon from that point in terms of development, and try to focus also just as much on marketing.
That's awesome, man. It's always good to hear. I mean, it's trying to get your name out there, trying to get your game out there. But like as you stated, like it can be hard because as you stated too, you're a solo dev, so everything is really on you. It's on you to do everything when it comes to the back end of the game, with coding, level design, the character design, any of the coding, scripting, pixel art, whatever it all pertaining to the game. Not only that, you also have to wear many hats. You got to be the marketer, you got to reach out to people and try and be that person that puts your game out there so other people can see it. And I really do hope that works out for you so that you can get it out over in Pittsburgh, because I think that'd be a big boost. And I think it'll be a big boost with more people playing it, streaming it, to get it out there as well. And you jumping in there like you did with Maz when he streamed it, and you were able to jump in there and get a bunch of eyeballs on it, So it's like, it's huge. It's huge when it comes to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's something I've been trying to do too, is like sometimes if I'm just in bed scrolling on like TikTok or whatever, I see, I always see the live streams of people playing games, and it's like games that I really like, and sometimes they're games that like I'm surprised people know about, so I get excited, and I immediately like that streamer if they're playing something that like is like an obscure niche game that I like. So I'll just kind of talk to them, and then eventually I just mention, hey, you might want to check out my game as well, and yeah, that's definitely what happened with Maz, and I'm so grateful that he checked it out and streamed it, and also gave me this opportunity to tell you guys more about it. So I really, I guess this is part of marketing too, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
100%.
But I do think that that's something that indies in general definitely struggle with, is marketing their game, because when you are that deep into developing something, you kind of lose sight of everything else. There's been weeks where like my house wasn't as clean as I wanted it, just because I'm so entrenched in the development process. But it kind of happens.
Absolutely, man. Well, banking off of that, I want to ask you a question. How long has your game actually been in production, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so not counting the original and like all the ideas that I've, kind of come up with over the years between the original being released and this release, there's been several, well, not several, but there's at least 2 attempts that I can think of where I tried to reimagine the game, and I did have something playable with like a couple other guys I was working with at one point, and that kind of just fizzled out. But this one was like, I guess the third time's the charm. I started doing this one in 2019, and I just started like finally having like all the pieces there to like put it together, design wise. And my pixel art had improved, my ability to use the code had improved. So I was really in a comfortable place to like actually just kind of do it myself. And that started in 2019. That's this version of Madhouse that we're talking about now. That started in 2019, but I didn't really work on it consistently from 2019 until now. I had a lot going on in life. I was in a pretty big relationship at the time, and I was also working on another really big project. So I didn't have a lot of time to work on this game, but the past year or two, like my time like has shifted solely to this, because like all those other obligations kind of just went away, and now I'm just like completely focused on this. So I'd say even though it started in 2019, what you see now is really the product of the past 2 years.
Nice, man. No, good stuff. A lot of progress in those 2 years, and a lot of learning, it seems like, as well, from the past, putting everything together. And that's interesting too, that you said that you had tried to do something with a couple other people and it kind of fizzled out. And I do think that I've talked about this before with some other people, that it can be hard working with others. It really can. I mean, you think it's going to be great and you're going to be able to get maybe double, triple the amount of work done. But if not everyone's on the same path, in a same amount of motivation behind the project, it can get it can get difficult.
Yeah, that is like 100% true, because I've worked on multiple projects with like different groups of people, and it really depends on like where the people are like in terms of motivation and mindset, like you said. And the thing with game development is, if one wheel falls off, the whole thing's going to crash, and that's just the unfortunate reality of it sometimes. And I have had a lot of projects that I was excited to work on that just kind of just stopped because the people or the person that I was working with, things came up in their life where they couldn't continue working on it, and then it just became this it just froze, and that was it. But yeah, if you do find the right team though, and everybody's on the same page and everybody's competent and motivated, and they make that development their core thing that they do, then I think you can make some really incredible stuff with other people. But I do like to work on my own, just to not have that risk of like other variables, because my own life has enough variables as it is.
Yeah, man. I get it for sure.
It's like Pneumatics is talking to a mirror here.
I know. What is going on here, man? Well, Matt says so. I did a whole video about like I went through a project. I released my first game was on mobile. It was called Up Jumper, and it ended up getting taken down. And I would love to get it back up, but I think the person I made the game with took it down. And because we had a falling out on the second game we tried to make, and it was like we went from 2D project to he wanted to do a 3D project, and I was against it. But I went through with it because we followed my plans for the first game. And unfortunately, yeah, it was, dude, creative control. It was the blame game at some point because a lot of things went down. And at the end of it, I was sitting there like waiting, like waiting, like we're using source tree in order to communicate with the project with one another. And it would be like a month or two waiting for a push from him from the project and nothing. And I'm like, hey man, you gonna like jump on this or what? And nothing. So it ended
Yeah.
up fizzling out pretty quick.
I'm sorry to hear you've had that experience, man. That's tough because, like, fortunately, I haven't really had any like major falling outs with coworkers, so I'm grateful for that. But like, I totally like understand how, like, it's bad enough to like see a project halt because of some other circumstance beyond your control, but like that just sounds like it's insult to injury in terms of
Yeah.
what happened.
Yeah. And it's weird too, like when you run into this situation, if you ever do run into the situation, hopefully you never do, but like I own the game because I have the key to it. So it is my like, my property, whatever, but it's also his code, so I'm not going to go about that. I'd rather go about trying to remake the game on my own than to just go and re-upload it. But yeah, I mean, things happen, live and learn, and it's what we do. But that's why, as you stated, it's sometimes easier just to be solo because then you're relying on yourself. You are the reason that game gets done or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely appreciate you, Paul, talking about your background and how you got to where you are. But why don't we talk about Madhouse now? I'm sure that you're chomping at the bit as much as I am to talk about it. So Madhouse, it blends these cute characters with intense gore-soaked horror. So how did you come up with that unique contrast? And what influences, like, was it 90s punk or early 2000s indies, shaped that art style?
Yeah, so I'll just come out and say it. Like, if you know the game that inspired the visual kind of theme of Madhouse, it's very obvious. But I played a game back in the early 2000s that was a old Famicom game. That's the Japanese NES, and it was called Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti, and it was
Loved it.
basically like, yeah, you played it? Okay.
Oh,
So,
yes.
so you already know. There was something really charming about seeing all these like classic horror tropes done in like this cutesy kind of defanged chibi aesthetic. And I think that like that kind of style really resonated with me. And when I originally started working on Madhouse, I kind of used that style, and I had no like plan for Madhouse. It was just, oh, I just want like chibi horror characters like killing each other, and that'll be fun. And that was just kind of like what I ended up running with. And I think as a child of the 80s, there was just a lot of huge influence from Japan on my sensibilities and my work and my taste, because back in the 80s, like everything, like for kids at least, was being exported from Japan, like toys and games and cartoons. So it was like all this stuff that I grew up with, I didn't even know it was Japanese at the time. I just knew that I liked that sort of aesthetic of like Kinnikuman Man, which is like the muscle men. I don't know if you've seen them, or just like the classic Famicom and NES games that had like a lot of like kind of cutesy characters like Lolo, or stuff like that. It was just cool to see like those kind of. Dragon Quest is another good example, like those
Oh yeah.
really nicely designed, like the monsters in Dragon Quest, they have like a goofiness to them. They almost feel like they're cartoony, like they're massive fire-breathing dragons and skeletal warriors, but like it's cute the way they look in the game. And I think that's a cool juxtaposition for horror, because horror is one of those things that, like, when it takes itself too seriously, sometimes I think it just kind of, people don't take it seriously. So like I think it's easier with horror to like wrap it in something unexpected, and then it just kind of becomes its own thing.
Absolutely agree with that for sure.
So in the demo, it introduces Butch's revenge quest in the town of Grayville. Without spoiling too much, what can you share about the story's origins and how like the open world exploration ties into the narrative?
Yeah, so it starts off with this very cold opening with this very classic revenge hook. And I know that some people are going to be like already turned off by like that particular trope, because, some people might find that sort of plot motivation to be a little problematic or whatever. And I get that. But, without speaking too much on that, Butch's story is just the catalyst for a broader story of events that happen in the world of Madhouse. Madhouse features like an ensemble cast of different characters with different stories and different motivations. The demo gives you a slice of Butch's story, and the full game will bring a bunch of different characters to kind of converge into one overlapping story. So that's just part of it. That's just the immediate hook. And I know that that's what the demo and the Steam page launch trailer really leaned into, was Butch's Tale for Revenge. I think it starts with that because that's a very accessible, understandable thing. You know, if you put aside like the problematic details of it or whatever, but you know, you've kind of got this classic revenge story, and it's very on the nose and it's very steeped in tropes, but that's just part of a bigger story that's going to unfold, and I'm really excited to tell that story. So
I do like that too, because I was thinking about it as you were saying that. Is it's a revenge story, and no spoilers here, but what you see unfold at the beginning of that demo absolutely makes you want to take part in that revenge story.
yeah, I mean, it's altogether, Madhouse is a story of like redemption, not just for Butch, but for like other characters as well. And it's about, you know, it's about friendship too between the other characters that, you know, Butch is gonna interact with along the way. And it's just about, you know, not to be like, oh, it's the power of friendship overcoming evil or whatever, but like it's about people with very tragic backstories that are just like trying to redeem themselves from what life did to them, basically. And I think that they can get there by kind of relying on each other throughout certain points.
Awesome, man. Well, now that we got through a little bit of that, I want to talk about the combat. So the combat in your game, in the demo, feels very fast. It's brutal, slashing around. You got a couple other weapons that the player can grab onto. What was your design philosophy for making the actions both accessible and satisfying? You know, you always hear about that final, that polish upon a game that makes things just satisfying to play and use. What was your real idea behind making that all come to life?
Well, it's funny because Madhouse originally started with like, at the time there weren't a lot of like 2D or pixel art games, especially that had like blood that would fly out of, you know, the characters or, you know, the enemies.
Yeah.
And just kind of lay on the ground, and just if you played enough, the whole level would just be, you know, covered in it. And so that was like one of the first kind of aesthetic hooks that I wanted to use. But it sort of evolved into like, I like this idea that enemies, when you destroy them, they really feel like they're popping open, not just with a bunch of blood, but like little skulls and bones fly out and like coins fly out, and then you grab the coins, and it creates this nice really little feedback loop of like, okay, I'm gonna pop these guys, grab the coins, and you know, it feels good because it's just fun to just blow stuff up and pop things open, you know, to put it simply.
Yeah, man, you're absolutely right. Absolutely. And that's the exact feeling you get from it as you're going through. It's really, the sound effect just pairs so great with the way you're slashing across enemies and yeah, destroying them. It's good stuff.
Thanks. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, you know, on top of that, I do like how also the combat really kind of makes you play at its pace. And that's one thing that I ran into during the stream, and you kind of called me out on it, which is good, is that I'm just trying to get through it. And, you know, Kronos, you got stuck in that sewer as well.
Yeah.
That if you play at your pace, you're going to die. And so I very quickly learned how to adapt and get through that area, but it was not an easy thing. And I think I like the implementation of the way that you put, you know, save spots in. You can't just quick save or save wherever you want to.
Yeah, it's definitely got like that classic, here's a save point. You know, I was playing a lot of Dark Souls 3 at the time when I started like reimagining this. So I think that's why things like rolling and like these like save point, you know, being isolated things got added. But it's funny that you bring that up, because playing at your own pace, that wasn't even something I really noticed about the single player until I was watching your stream, and you brought it up that you just wanted to run through, and then I was like, yeah, it kind of makes you play at your own pace, and then it was like a light went off, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. And the thing I also like is the fact that you implement different ways of saving. You can't quick save. You can only save at the phones, which is awesome. And you mentioned Dark Souls, and I kind of threw that phrase out, Souls-like. I mean, it's definitely not Souls-like for sure, but it had that kind of, you're playing at my pace type mentality to the game. And I like the fact that it was punishing enough that if you die, you're going back to that last save spot. So it doesn't matter how far into it you get. If you die, you're starting over from that save spot, which is really, really cool. And when we got to the end of the sewer area, right before we went in to fight the boss, it was really, really refreshing to see a phone there as well, because there were a couple times I had to restart.
Right. So yeah, I do try to. I actually I do try to use them sparingly, but I did end up adding in this next level that you guys are going to see in the early access version. It's I'd say it's a little bit bigger than the sewer. I did put one halfway through. Now, I have had a lot of feedback on the save system because there are some things that I don't like about it. There's some things that other people don't like about it. The way it works currently is when you die, you keep all of your progress. So any door or chest you've opened or any event you've advanced in the game, that's all saved. But it sends you back to that save point and you lose all your money. Now, I do like that there's some punishment in losing money for dying, but I'm struggling with like it being all your money. So I'm gonna try maybe just half your money, kind of like Dragon Quest does, where
I was going to say you're a Dragon Quest.
yeah, exactly. So,
Yep.
or I was thinking of just leaning even further into the Souls-like stuff and making it so when you die, you lose all your money, but you can recover it if you can get back to it. So I'm still kind of feeling that out. There is some like hybridization on the save, because if you die in a boss room, then that's the exception, and I'll explain why. It's because, so if you go from the save point in the town and you go through the sewer and you collect a bunch of like coins and open chests and doors and get a new weapon and get some ammo, then when you've reached, if you die and you're sent back to that save point in town, you're going to keep all that stuff that you had and all that stuff you opened. Conversely, all the ammo that you used during that run, because it's ammo, it's expendable, that's going to be lost. Now, the exception that I've implemented is that when you fight a boss, it doesn't adhere to that logic. Just because I don't think it's very fun for the player to go into a boss, use up all their ammo, die, and then get thrown back to a save point with no ammo. So I'm making an exception to that for now, even though the only thing about that is it kind of bugs me from a design standpoint, because it's inconsistent with how saving works throughout the game. But the reason I don't have it like that throughout the rest of the game, I could just do one-to-one saves, but then you risk losing a bunch of progress that you make. You know what I mean? So it has to be this really fine balance of like not annoying the player by taking away too much and not like their progress, but also like, but I'm glad to hear that you guys like the save system, because it's definitely been a sore spot for me from a design standpoint.
Well, Paul, you and I are the same age. You're a little younger than I am, but I will share that that's probably why. It's a classic gamer thing. You didn't have quick save. I mean, I played Final Fantasy IV when I was a kid, and you could save in the open world. You could save in certain areas, like with all Final Fantasy games, and then they come out with these updated, and you could just quick save whenever you want to. It's like, oh, that's kind of easy now. So you got to have some challenge there. I agree with you.
No, I agree, and I think that Madhouse tends to be like a hard game in some ways, but I don't ever want it to feel unfair or frustrating. I did have a friend who was maybe a little more casual, and he did play a decent amount of it, but I could tell that he said like when he was doing the upcoming area that's not in the demo, he's like, man, you must have been in a really bad place when you made this, because like he's like, all these enemies are like just destroying me, and I'm a little concerned that like difficulty ramp is so sudden that early on, because it's like, well, if it's that hard that early on, I mean, I'm just going to try to keep it consistently difficult at that point, although it should ramp up. But like if it's already hard, then where does it go from here? I don't want to ramp it too hard, but so it's all about balance and testing and just seeing what's fair and what's reasonable, I think.
It's a lot of it sticking and moving in that game, though. I noticed that with the rats. It was just kind of hitting that and then going on and then backing off and losing all my stuff, to your point, and losing your stuff like when you respawn, still losing it. It's almost kind of like a roguelite type feel to it. You have a lot of different subgenres built into this, which makes it a very, very interesting game. I mean, there are a lot of games where you die and you come right back where you left off. It's like almost kind of like a checkpoint, or it's like a point where you just respawn, and there you have all your inventory, you have all your cash. I mean, that's not overly challenging. Some of these games need to be challenging, and I did notice that this game made me play much more cautiously, knowing that I was going to lose that stuff. But you're absolutely right, and I think, going back to what you were saying on fighting the bosses, I think that's probably the best move for you, because it would be hard for you to have a fight, almost beat that boss, and then have nothing to actually defend yourself or progress.
It really has to use like a unique approach to saving, I think, to work for the kind of game it is, because it does, like you said, make you play at your own pace. The stakes are high. Like, dying isn't just a slap on the wrist, because you do lose all your money currently. Now, I have some ideas to mitigate that. The sting of that, like, I wanted to implement a banking system where you could, like, when you're in the town, you can just put your cash in an ATM. That way, if you die, like, you'll at least have that money. I also want to play around with maybe not taking all of it, but just having it, like I mentioned before. But yeah, it's definitely, there are stakes, and I think that's important to have in a game. I don't think things should be just a walk in the park, because you kind of want players to really, you want to maximize the content that you built. So kind of making sure that the player is like not rushing through it all, obviously, by maybe making it hard but fair. I think that's a good approach typically. But
Yeah, man. There's so many games out there that that just let the player get away with it. So it's good to see. Just kind of just reiterating on it. A lot of games nowadays should have something that well, maybe not all games, but like maybe a good amount should have something where if the player dies, there's some kind of repercussions for it, where most of the time there's not. So it's good to see that. It's good to see that in your game.
yeah, I hope at least that, like, if a player feels, defeated or frustrated with a certain part, that they'll at least be compelled enough to come back and want to like finish it. Like, I had one of the people in my Discord, he was playtesting the story on Monday, I think, and he was having a lot of trouble with this boss, and then he's like, all right, I'm gonna stop here. But he wanted to play it again the next day, and he was able to beat it. And I will say that the demo, you're a lot more limited to kind of the full expanse of what your character can do. In the early access, you're gonna be able to unlock more abilities, like rolling and strafing and charging your weapon to like release like a projectile. Those are going to be things that are going to expand your abilities. There's also going to be more weapons at your disposal, because there's going to be a gun shop that opens up, and you're going to be able to buy like more than just a shotgun. So there's definitely going to be a lot more there, and I do want to get in this. The one thing that I'd like to get in before early access, I don't know if I'm going to have time to do it. It's like one last system to kind of implement, but I wanted to have this mechanic where you could go in the diner and eat from a menu, and certain foods would boost certain points towards certain stats. So you could actually increase your health, stamina, and your special abilities duration time, depending on how you leveled up those stats. That's something that's in the pipeline, hopefully. But I do think that Madhouse does kind of ask you to grind just a little bit for collecting, since coins are so central to buying all this stuff. If you really want to have, like, at least buy ammo for your guns, because those boss battles, they're pretty hard, but if you have ammo, it makes them a lot more reasonable. And I think going into these boss battles stocked up is a good idea. So that's one pro tip that I would give to my players. So don't be afraid to just get out there and grind for some coins, buy a bunch of ammo, and then approach the bosses that way. I think it'll be a lot easier for people if they go in with that mindset. I really want the players to just use everything that I'm giving them in terms of their abilities, their special ability, their weapons, and all that. Because I notice that some people will just play the game just walking around and using melee on everything, and that's perfectly fine, but it's going to be a lot harder if you stick to that and don't really make the most of all the stuff you're given.
I got a question for you. And so, like, you said your friend was playing it, and he said you must have been in a dark place when you made that. Are there any things that you created that you actually like cut out because you were like, okay, this might be a little too hard or just a little too far out there?
So I haven't cut anything like that yet, but I'm certainly, I think about it a lot, because I think some of the stuff that's in there right now is pretty darn graphic, and like especially with like, you know, Jennifer and her whole murder, and, you know, the scene where Butch goes in and discovers her. I think that's, you know, it's really towing the line for me personally, because on one hand it's very striking, but on the other, like I think like some people are going to see that and just be kind of shocked and disgusted, and rightfully so. So I've actually thought about possibly implementing a mode that's like, you know, the mode that's out now is like the uncensored mode, but there's an option to like flip a switch and like maybe have things just be a little less in your face with some of that stuff. That's going to take some time to set up, so it's not a huge priority right now. So I'm going to run with like the graphic, vulgar nature of everything. But I do think I know when to draw the line too, because there have been like ideas for certain things that I was just like, nah, that would just be too in bad taste, you know, like it's already like on the verge of that right now. And I think for some people it will be considered, it's already probably in bad taste territory for some people, but I really want to redeem all of this bad taste with like really heartwarming moments as well, that are just kind of not make that thing that happened okay, but like give a resolution and a sort of redemption for it.
I agree with that. I mean, it's one of those things where but the thing I like about that specifically is the fact that it kind of gives you emotionally invested with it, saying, okay, we're going to get this guy. we're going to do something about this for sure. And I think that's, you know, to have a censorship thing, that's okay. And, you know, with something like that, is like where you're not kind of prioritizing right at the second. That's the beauty of releasing in early access as well. You're going to get that kind of feedback. You're going to have the time to make those tweaks before a full release.
Yeah, absolutely. And like at the end of the day, like my philosophy for, you know, designing games and releasing games now has kind of shifted away from like, I'm not trying to make like the next big hit. If it's successful to any degree, I'll be happy about it. But at the end of the day, I'm not really making this game for anybody really but myself, as selfish as that sounds. Like, this is just the kind of game that I've always wanted to make. Maybe not so much with like the extreme content, but like in every other respect, it really pulls from a lot of my own personal design sensibilities and stuff like that. And I know that there's some parts that are ugly and gross, but like to me, that's the nature of reality in life. You know what I mean? It's not always going to be a sugar-coated walk through the park. And I think it's kind of presenting a world that's so dark and grim that, like, you know, that when there are moments of levity or good things that happen, those moments will be felt even more poignantly because you've already gotten through like the bad stuff. And that's just something I learned from life in general. You know what I mean?
100%. And you know, it's not selfish, to be honest with you, Paul, because we talk about this a lot on the channel. That this indie development, indie games, they come from passionate individuals, people that are trying to fulfill their dreams. Now, you have a burning need to tell this story that's been with you for 20 years. And this is a really good forum for you to be able to do that on Steam. So there's no such thing as selfish, especially when you're 20 years in.
Thank you. I appreciate that understanding because, yeah, I feel like, you know, if I can get on a little rant here for a second, I feel like that the game industry right now is really hyper saturated with a lot of stuff. And, you know, a lot of people go into it wanting to make the next Balatro or something, you know, some big hit. And I think like if people have that kind of attitude with making games, they're probably going to be disappointed 9 times out of 10 because it's very hard. I mean, you can still make a great game. It doesn't mean your game's going to be successful. You know what I mean? And my goal is to make something that I think is good. And if other people enjoy it, that's great too. But like, I've kind of like have the philosophy now that I want to see the games that I make as like more like, instead of like, you know, a major, like, I don't know what a good comparison is to like a really popular thing that everybody likes, but I was going to say McDonald's, but I don't think that's a good example. But, you know, I let's just use McDonald's in this instance, just pretend that everybody loves it and it's crazy about it. I mean, it's pretty popular. It's pretty world renowned, but okay, maybe Disneyland's a better example. So I'm not trying to make Disneyland. I'm trying to make more of a secret clubhouse or like a niche, you know, thing that like the people that like it are really going to love it. And it's not going to be for everybody. And I totally understand and accept that. I happen to like a lot of very like niche cult films, obscure anime, stuff like that. And I'm really passionate about that stuff because I find it so cool and underrated. And it kind of feels good to like things that like haven't been just blown out of proportion, with everybody loving them. I know that sounds like a hipster thing, but that's the kind of media I think that I'm going to feel comfortable creating. Like if it doesn't have like a mass appeal, that's fine with me. If a few people like it, that's great. But like I said, yeah, like you nailed it. I just want to tell the story at this point, and I want to hopefully make a fun game in the process.
Yeah, with anything, man, to stand out nowadays, it's got to be different. It's got to be unique, and it's got to be yours.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And if anything, like I know Madhouse is sort of like regressive in some of its ways with, using these sort of tropes, but it is a pastiche of like that 90s kind of unapologeticness and just edginess of like, because it takes place in 1999, so it's definitely leaning into that both thematically and how it presents itself. And I think that there's, because I don't know if you guys remember in the 90s, like the kind of edgy PC games that we had, but there was some controversial stuff, and I don't even think it's that controversial, but I do think it's a little more in your face than a lot of games these days would try to be. And
Yeah.
I think that if you're not conforming to like social norms and social standards, then in a sense you are doing something that's pretty punk, like if you're trying to please, one side or the other, that's not very punk. If you're just kind of standing in a place where the game is doing its best to be very antisocial, I think.
Yeah, man, for sure.
It's so funny when you talk about controversial things from the night. Do you by any chance, Paul? Do you remember the game Night Trap?
No, I've never played it, but I'm familiar with it. Wasn't that
You've heard
like an
of it.
AMV or an FMV
Yes.
game? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
it was
yeah.
videos. It was actually about a serial killer that was prowling a house with a bunch of women doing like a slumber party type thing, and you had to go around and protect them, but that serial killer would actually kill them all if you let them. And it was very graphic, and it was all video, and so it wasn't like graphics or animation. It was actually the act. And I remember when I seen that when I was a kid, and my mother's like, "Don't you even think about it, mister," But it pissed a lot of people off back then, because sensibilities back then were a lot more than they are nowadays. I mean, you do a game like that, who cares? It's just another Tuesday, right? But with this game, it really like caused a lot of like unrest. It was on the news and everything.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm not just, making it edgy in some ways just for the sake of being like contrarian or edgy or whatever, but like it wasn't like when the game was originally conceived back in 2004, it actually wasn't that far off from the 90s, so it was still kind of
Right.
in that mindset and ethos. And I was only like probably 22 or 23 when I had come up with this. I mean, I was not that far off of being an adolescent myself, I guess.
Nice. Love it, man. All right. On that note, I think we're going to go ahead and do a quick ad break. And when we get back, we're going to dive into some more questions with the dev, Paul, behind the game Madhouse, right after this. Hey, Indie Hangout crew. Loving the show? Help us spread the word by dropping a quick 5-star rating or review wherever you might be listening to this podcast. It takes just a second and helps more than you know. Thanks for being awesome. Now, back to the show. And welcome back, everyone, to the Indie Hangout podcast with me, Pneumatics, Osak Kronos, Maztec Gaming, and the game dev behind Madhouse, Paul. All right back into it. So I'm going to get into a question about one of your other game modes. So the demo gives us a taste of single player, right, with campaign, but some people may not know, the listeners may not know, that there's also a 4-player versus mode. So when did you decide to implement something like that, and was it difficult?
Yeah, so the funny thing is, the versus mode of Madhouse is actually the foundation of the game. That's what the game was built on originally, was just this fun multiplayer versus mode where you were just killing other like horror mascot type characters with different weapons. And that's really what I wanted to create, and that's what I did with the original. It was a 2-player versus game initially, and a lot of people that I was posting it to they said, well, I don't have anybody to play this with. It's like a local PC game that I have to split my keyboard. You know, some people would play with their kid brother or like their friend, and that was great. But for most people that were playing free PC games back then, they didn't have like it wasn't online, so they kind of wanted a way to experience the game without having it just be a multiplayer game. So back then, that's when I started to introduce a single player mode, and that's when some of these story elements were kind of just put on top of it very like lightly. You know, you just would get an intro and then it would take you right into like a level select, and you would just knock out different levels. It wasn't like an open world game. With the new game, I decided I was gonna try to give that single player campaign a lot more care by making it like this open world Zelda like, really RPG-esque story exposition. So you would get bits and pieces of the story as you progressed, and you would kind of have to move through each area to kind of experience it. So this mode was built kind of alongside the multiplayer this time. So I would say with this 2019 version that I'm on now, it did kind of use that single player first, but then the versus mode was kind of just built right alongside as a sidecar. And it's really, Madhouse is really two games in one, because you have this story campaign that's going to give you what you guys experience, but then you've got this really amazing multiplayer experience that unfortunately I don't think a lot of people are even going to get to see it. I mean, you guys didn't try it, right?
No, I didn't actually dive into it.
Yeah,
Oh,
I didn't
man.
get into it either.
I'm
Yeah,
on your
so-
Discord, so I'm looking forward to playing around with that shortly.
Yeah, I would invite anybody that wants to play it, you guys especially, to join my Discord and try to get in on one of those playtest sessions, because we hold them, you know, sometimes frequency is like once a week, sometimes it's once a month, depending on how busy I am. But what I do is I host the game. I just run it locally, and I use a program called Parsec, which lets people connect to my computer, and it treats their connection as like local users on my computer. So everybody basically just brings a gamepad, because the game supports keyboard play in single player and also in multiplayer for up to 2 players, because you can split a keyboard between 2 players, but you can't really split a keyboard between 4 players. That's why having a controller for everybody becomes kind of necessary at that point. I would like to take it online someday, but you know, no promises there, because that's a whole other can of worms. But I do highly recommend, and I can't enough, the multiplayer aspect of the game. It's almost like a completely different game in the way it plays, because it's very versus focused. You can do team based gameplay if you have, you know, enough people. You can do 2 teams of 2 or 1v3. But basically, that multiplayer is just chaotic. It's fun, and it's highly recommended. And I wish there was a way to get more people in on that mode, because like, I really think it's a great mode, and it has just as much polish. And I would say if it's not as good as the single player experience, it might even be better for some people if you like playing versus games.
Nice. Hell yeah, man. Definitely got to get into it now. Now that you're explaining it, I'm like, I missed out on that.
Yeah, no, I really hope you get a chance to experience it, because especially with 4 players, it's amazing. Like, I can show you guys clips, because I record the sessions and, you know, watch them for like bugs and stuff. But like, there's so many great moments. Like, there's so many times where we're like screaming and jumping out of our chairs. It gets really intense.
Nice, man.
In fact, the story campaign was originally just built just to market the versus mode, because at its heart, it was a versus game, but the story mode was kind of alongside to kind of get people to experience the game and hopefully get them into like trying out the multiplayer.
Gotcha. So, real quick, did you say that the keyboard controls, do they work for single player too?
Yeah, so the game fully supports keyboard controls. If you jump in the game, the first part of the game kind of lets you know like what to press. So if you don't have a gamepad hooked up, it's gonna default to your keyboard, and it's gonna tell you which keys you need to press for which actions. I do recommend playing with a gamepad, but if you don't have one, you can experience the single player entirely without a gamepad, and you can experience 1v1 2-player action with just a keyboard as well. But if you're going to play with 3 or 4 players in Versus, you're each going to need a gamepad for that.
Oh, okay. So I'm dumb and I thought you could only use a controller, dude. And I was like, whoa, oh man, now I gotta go find my controller. Where is it? Hook it to my PC. And actuality, I could have just skipped through and continued playing with my keyboard. I don't know. So no, good to know. But piggybacking off, well, since I've already asked that, and now that I know, do you plan to implement also controls to the Steam Deck or anything else? I mean, it's pretty much just keyboard, controller, and yeah, the only other thing I can think of is like a Steam Deck kind of layout.
So I don't have a Steam Deck personally, so I wouldn't know how it runs on Steam Deck. But with the controller setup, I wouldn't see why it wouldn't already work on Steam Deck. Is that right? I mean, has anybody tried it or?
I've not, but I will let you know because now that I know that, I know Steam Deck. When you play games on a Steam Deck, they can have just regular layouts that are like the most common button layouts for games that you play. So I'll give it a shot and see for myself. But I just figure I'll throw it out there because, like I said, I didn't even know you can do it with a keyboard. So that's much better on my end because I'm definitely a keyboard mouse player.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely let me know how it goes on Steam Deck because I'm curious about that myself. As for keyboard, yeah, it doesn't support mouse, so you will be kind of stuck. And if you were trying to play it with like the arrow keys, that might not work for Player One. Player One's controls are mapped currently by default to WASD and like JK and stuff like that. So you kind of do play on that side, and that's because it does allow the second player to play on the arrow keys and numpad. So that's why it's set up that way. I don't have key mapping yet, but that is something that I'd like to include along with like volume control for like sound effects and music. That's just something that like I'm probably going to try to get in before the EA release.
Nice. Yeah, for sure. You know, a side note, I always hear, and you've probably heard this too, is that players really get upset if you don't include a way for them to change the key map.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And that's just, I mean, I'm not a very technical, like, guy when it comes to coding things. So if you look at my code and you know anything about coding, it's probably embarrassing for somebody who actually knows what they're doing to look at. So a lot of the technical stuff I do sometimes struggle with, and I don't like to do that kind of stuff. I would like to do it, though, because I do understand that that's what players expect, but they might just have to deal with it while it's in early access until I get
Oh
around to
yeah,
that part.
for sure, dude.
So my recommendation is just plug in a controller and go crazy.
Nice, man. Cool.
All right. So I'm glad you mentioned the early access, Paul, and your game is launching in just under 2 weeks here, October 1st, with the first story arc, more characters and weapons. What are you most excited for players to experience in that version? And how do you plan to evolve the game over the next 2 to 3 years based on feedback?
Yeah, so I'm just really excited for players to see more of the story because, it's going to shift. And like I said, because it does have this sort of cast of other characters, you're going to see a little more than just Butch's story in the early access. And I think that's going to be really cool to see. It's going to be really cool to see how things start to kind of like connect themselves too. And I'm super excited for that. I'm also super excited, with more of the, for people that do get a chance to play the multiplayer, there's going to be a lot more unlocked in that. Instead of just the 4 characters you get in the demo, there's going to be 12 in the first early access, and I'm going to just kind of plan to release more, on a sort of drip feed, I guess, so people can get those characters as the game develops. For early access development, I'm just hoping to see how people receive the game, and if people are hyped about it, then it's going to definitely motivate me. I'm going to be working on it either way, but if people like it and give me great feedback, then that's just going to make the journey a lot easier, I think.
So, on that note, like, say your game is to take off and do really well, and it's, works really well on controller. Do you have any plans to maybe get it ported over to consoles?
I think it would do really good on something like a console, like Switch or something that has like sort of a multiplayer mindset built into it. Because like I said, that versus mode is really a big part of the game. And I think that, I think that getting it on console would definitely help more players experience that end of things. I don't have any plans for that currently. I'm kind of just I want to just try to finish the PC version first and then, look at that depending on how well it does. If it ends up just being a PC only game, then that's fine. But if it gets a really good reception and it seems like it's worth the investment of putting it on other platforms, then I think that's definitely something I'd be interested in. I had a friend tell me that the game itself has like a very, speaking to Switch specifically, he said my game has like very Nintendo ish sensibilities when it comes to like game design and stuff. And that's definitely true, because that's like the school of game design that I grew up with, was the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and etc. But he said the theme of the game is very opposite of Nintendo. So I definitely have to wonder like what kind of like ESRB and rating type stuff I might run into with Matt. I think it would be hard to get anything below an M rating at this point.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, man.
100,000%.
I mean,
maybe even 200% there, Paul. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that was one of the bigger observations that were being brought out by our viewers when we were streaming your game, if you remember. That specifically Game Boy Color vibes to it. And I was thinking Super Game Boy, because I felt it was like a mix of that Super Nintendo style and Game Boy.
Yeah, I definitely consider it to be like, to me, it feels firmly in like the Super Nintendo sort of library, because that's really when I started, like, I think the first time I ever did pixel art was actually on Mario Paint for the Super Nintendo.
Oh, wow.
And so I had the Super Nintendo, I think, might be my favorite gaming platform of all time. It has like so many amazing games that I love on it, like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 4 and 6, Super Metroid. I mean, it's got Zelda, Link to the Past. It's just got an amazing library, and there's a lot of cool stuff there. And I feel like, it's a lot higher than an 8-bit NES game, and maybe fits comfortably on the 16-bit. I have heard like a lot of people draw comparisons to Game Boy, though, and I find that really interesting. And I wonder if it's the sprites that remind them of Game Boy, or you mentioned Game Boy, Super Game Boy, and I do like that because the Super Game Boy was a peripheral for the Super Nintendo, so
Correct.
I think that works pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Final Fantasy 4 and 6, man. Those are two of my favorite Final Fantasy games. I think I got to agree with you on that. Super Nintendo being definitely my top 3 consoles as well.
Yeah, 6 is definitely my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time. So
the soundtrack by Pale Death has the retro like chiptune vibe. How did the music play into enhancing the horror and punk elements of Madhouse?
yeah, so the music is a really interesting thing here, because when I made the original Madhouse 20 years ago, like, I was just grabbing a lot of mods and XMs, which are like chiptune file format, or pieces of music, and I was just grabbing them from an XM or mod archive, and just grabbing all these chiptunes and getting them in Madhouse, because I really liked chiptunes in the early 2000s, because I thought they really captured a very video gamey sound. And that's why I chose them for Madhouse, because Madhouse, even in the early 2000s, was a sort of a retro stylization of video games, because we had already moved into higher poly 3D at that point. And I was trying to make something that was retro inspired, and I thought that chiptunes were a good fit. Well, with the music for the new one, I remember looking through some of those old files, and if you check the metadata, you can see like who authored some of them. And I kept seeing this name Pale Death come up, and I was like, wow, he like made a lot of these chiptunes that I used in the original Madhouse. And to me, in my mind, like, his sound is inseparable from Madhouse for me. So I tried to reach out to him a few times just to see if he'd be interested in working with me, or at least letting me use his music, because Pale Death, he's like from like, this guy's been making music since like the 90s. He's probably a little bit older than me. He's from Sweden, and he did a lot of work in like the tracker kind of scene, demo scene, and like making music for Cracktros and stuff like that. If you guys are familiar with that, it was basically like cracked software would sometimes have a Cracktro, like an intro splash screen with some like digital music, and he would make music for stuff like that. And his stuff just had a really cool and unique sound, and I think if you kind of like look through his library of work, like he just goes through different periods of like, some stuff sounding kind of like really gritty and like tense, and other stuff sounding kind of sad and melancholy. And both of those kind of eras of his music are just such good fits for Madhouse. And I reached out to him, and finally, he got back to me and he said, yeah, you're more than welcome to use the music. And so basically what I'm doing with Madhouse is he has made a few new tracks for it, but a lot of this stuff I'm using is stuff that he's created over his music career. And I'm just looking through his whole library and finding stuff that fits with, it's a really different process, I think, because I think in a lot of cases people will make a game and then a musician builds music around that game. But it's kind of in reverse in this situation, because I'm making a game, but then I'm like going through a musician's library and picking things that I think fit best with that piece. And it's been really cool to do that, because I think his stuff is, like I said, it's a really good fit, and it is kind of cool to just see where I can fit it in. And I think that his work is very good, and I think that it's kind of hasn't had like, I think it's kind of underrated, and I feel like this is like an opportunity to give him as an artist, some more exposure through something I'm working on. And it's his opportunity to enrich my game with his incredible music. And I'm so happy that he's working with me, because it's like, this is something that it just feels like, when I hear his stuff, like I said, it just feels like this is the sound of Madhouse.
His music slaps. It's really, really good. It fits. I agree with you 100%. It works really, really well. Really well.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it almost feels like it was meant to be, in a way, just with how well it works, and how well it fits the tone and the theme of the game. And I'm excited to hear what like new tracks he comes up with as we continue to work on this. I think right now he seems to be more in like kind of a peaceful era with his music. So it's kind of hard to fit some of his newer pieces into Madhouse, because it has this very like kind of nice sound to it, like where everything's good and happy. And I do know that there will be parts in Madhouse that will need music like that. So I think it's all going to work out pretty well in that regard too.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So I have another question for you, and then I think we're just going to jump in. We got a question from one of our listeners over in our Discord that we want to go ahead and grab. But before that, so if listeners have played the demo or plan to, what's one tip or hidden detail you'd share to enhance their experience before early access drops?
So I just want to tell people, to check out that multiplayer by any means possible. I know this is like the third time I brought it up, but like, I really think that like it is, I don't know if there's another indie game that like really has tapped into like this level of play with multiplayer. And it's one of those where like there's a lot to take in with it, because Madhouse, with all things unlocked, it's going to use like every button on the gamepad. So like, there's moving, attacking, rolling, strafing, secondary weapons, switching secondary weapons, special abilities, all kinds of stuff. But the more you play it, the more you're going to get this emergence of like really good gameplay as like you grow with it. And that's kind of the tip that I would give, is like, try out the multiplayer and like get good at it with your friends, because like once you guys all know what you're doing with it, that's when you're going to see that like high level gameplay emerge, where it's like you're going to get those moments where you're like, oh my god, like you're going to be jumping and screaming. I'm not trying to oversell it, but like those are the experiences that we have every time we have a play test session. And I play, the guys that I regularly play with, they're all really good at it. So like we have these really compelling, gripping moments that are a lot of fun. As for story mode, there isn't much to say about that other than just take your time with it. Play at your pace. Don't be afraid to grind. Don't be afraid to stock up on ammo. Don't be afraid to use the stuff that you have. Like, use your special ability. Like, if your health gets low and you're playing as Butch, use that rage ability so, you can have that boost to your regeneration and your stats. Don't be afraid to disengage from enemies and, let your health recover if you're playing as Butch, because he has that regenerative passive. And each player, or each character that you, well, I guess it's no secret that you're going to be able to play as other characters in this too, because it's going to be their stories as well. But you're going to notice a different shift in gameplay when you do play as these other characters, because for instance one of them might hit harder and you're going to notice that enemies drop a lot faster, but he also, to balance, has lower defense, so, and he might not have that regenerative ability. So it's kind of like at this point now the training wheels are off, so you really have to be careful and really maximize the stuff at your disposal. That's what I really want players to do, is to just make use of everything in the toolkit that I give them.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely.
I've got one more question for you as well, Paul. What other projects are you considering on, or have you worked on recently around?
Yeah, so you're asking like what other games I've worked on, or
Yeah, what other
besides-
projects are you working on? Have you worked on? What's next for Fubin's games after Madhouse? Give us a little bit of a rundown of what you've been doing, what games you've been working on, or what games you have worked on.
Yeah, sure. So I've been developing video games now for over 20 years, and before that I was making games on paper, like kind of like point and click adventure games that you played on paper with my buddies in high school, or dice games that were like kind of like old school RPGs. And then I kind of evolved into video games, and then I started making those indie games like Madhouse. I released a game called the indie game Legend, which was kind of inspired by one of my favorite NES games, The Guardian Legend. And the indie game Legend was sort of like an inside joke based on a community that I was a part of, a game development community. But I still tried to make a good game out of it, even though it was leaning on a lot of inside jokes and stuff. But the first commercial game I released was a mobile game called Spunk and Moxie, and it was kind of at the time where those hardcore platforming precision. What else did I work on? I worked on a game called World of Goo, which was a pretty big indie game back in the day. I didn't do development on that. I was just doing QA. And here's a fun fact. I have worked in the actual game industry. My first job was at Sega, and I was QA tester on Shadow the Hedgehog. I
Oh,
always like
wow.
to bring that up. And I actually had like the highest bug count of the whole department. So like they considered me like the expert tester on Shadow the Hedgehog.
That is awesome.
I definitely put that in my resume. So let's see what else. The indie game Legend, that was later remade as a 3D game, which is on Steam, called the Indie Game Legend 3D, and that basically like doubled the content. So it added all these new areas, and it's kind of like one of those 3D almost boomer shooter type things, but with a little more exploration, I guess, involved. So that one might be worth checking out. But I think the most recent and most notable game that I worked on was UFO 50, and I was the sort of main guy that worked on for those who don't know, UFO 50 is a collection of 50 retro style like 8-bit era games that you just open up the game and you have these 50 games to play with. It's a lot of people liken it to like a multi-cart, kind of like Action 52, but actually good, because the games, they're kind of using that old school similarities, but like with new school design sensibilities. So really proud of that one, because I worked on about 25% of those games to some degree, some more than others, but Night Manor was the one game that I worked on, like that was like the one that I directed out of the collection, and a lot of people really liked it. It's a point and click horror game where you're in this, you just wound up in this house. The first thing you need to do is escape from a room, and as you get out in the house, you meet this guy that's like in the house with you, and he's like pursuing you throughout the house. So you have to solve puzzles while this guy is like popping up to kill you every now and then you have to run away and hide from him. And meanwhile, you're like you're solving the mystery of like what the hell happened here, and people really liked it. So I'm really happy with how that game turned out. And I hope that it kind of sets a precedent for like, what I'm capable of doing as a game developer. And I hope that after playing that, more people will want to check out Madhouse.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Good stuff. All right. Well, I think we've gone through a lot of our questions, and love hearing about your background and Madhouse. I think our listeners are going to really enjoy jumping into this, and especially when it goes into early access. But before we end it here, we do have, as I stated, a question from one of our listeners over in our Discord. And it's kind of a lighthearted question, like a fun question to answer here. So it's from our listener Yemi the Ferret. It's such a legend, Yemi. This guy, he's like always asking a bunch of questions for us and jumping into the polls and stuff. So his question goes: the zombie apocalypse happens tomorrow. How prepared are you? And if you could choose a weapon from any video game to combat the undead, what would you choose?
Paul, I gotta put you on the spot. Have you answer that one first?
Well, let me just say that when 2020 happened, I just got all prepared for just about anything. So I think I'm in good shape as far as that goes. Probably just gonna go somewhere to high ground and have like a 12 gauge or something. Keep it simple.
What do you got? What do you got, Kronos? What are you gonna be doing, huh?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Let's see here. Tough choice. Like, I mean, I'd be prepared, but I don't know, like, what weapon would I choose from, like, a game or something? Well, you definitely, I would think, like, something with a lot of rounds, you know?
Absolutely.
I would probably try to find, like, a food store, you know, to hold up in. Plenty of supplies, and then just some weapons with a lot of rounds. Because you never know how much you're going to have to shoot.
Actually, I forgot the game part of that. I would probably change my question because there's like, I don't know. I mean, you could basically choose anything, but I guess, heck, since this was like a Madhouse theme thing, how about I choose a weapon from Madhouse?
Do it up. What's that weapon?
So I would choose the Man-Eater, which is a fully automatic shotgun. And it's one of the ultimate weapons in the multiplayer. So once you get it, like, you just hold the button and it just completely obliterates anything in its path.
That's awesome.
Okay, yeah. I feel like I need to get a little more video game related. And I'm going to go with my tried and true favorite of Halo, and I'd just go with the energy sword.
There you go.
Yeah, dude.
Dang. Isn't that a melee weapon, though?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
hardcore, man.
quiet. It's quiet, right?
That's true.
Yeah. But it cuts through everything.
What about you, New?
I feel like I wouldn't go with something that has rounds just because eventually you'd run out. I'd have to have something like a sword or something. But like maybe a spear. Yeah, maybe a spear. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's something I've never thought of. It's so weird. I don't know. Yeah, spear, because you could kind of keep them at bay. That's probably so dumb, but yeah, that's my go-to.
You're talking about like
Oh,
Kamari's
no.
spear from like Final Fantasy X?
Absolutely, dude.
There
How'd
you
you
go.
know? That's what I was going
Now,
for.
come on, dude.
Oh, where you
we all
go?
know you'd be swinging the Buster Sword around.
Oh yeah, man. If I could
there
lift
it is, bro. Yeah, right. This thing's bigger than New.
Yeah, for real though. Last up, Mr. Maz.
Those of you that know me, getting innovative and trying to have fun with it at the same time. I was a huge fan of the Dead Rising series. Dead Rising 3 is like my favorite of all of the Dead Rising iterations out there. I haven't played the director's cut of the original yet. I plan on doing that hopefully in Shocktober, but I'll tell you, all kinds of really cool combinations. They've got this thing called a split shot in Dead Rising 3 that I think I would go with. It's a lead pipe and an assault rifle, and when you put them together, it's an assault rifle that shoots in 3 different directions at the same time. That has a very high very high capacity magazine. So I think that's probably what I'm going with is the split shot.
Yeah. Good stuff. Awesome. No, I love it. I love the question. Thank you, Yemi, for leaving that for us to answer. And actually, I want to turn it on our listeners. What would you use? What would be your go-to? Go ahead and leave it down over in the Discord, which I haven't mentioned yet. If you didn't know, we have a Discord. You want to go ahead and click in the About section. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, click on the link, jump it there, and join on in the discussion with us. But other than that, that pretty much wraps it up. But before we completely wrap it up here, I want to go ahead and let our listeners know where they can find you. And of course, I'm sure the main thing is for people to jump in and wishlist your game over on Steam.
Yeah. So thanks so much again for having me on this, guys. This was a lot of fun. And yeah, so I'm just Fubans on all platforms. That's my first initial P, my last name Hubans, Hubans. And the game, you can go directly to the Steam page. It's really simple. We grab the Madhouse game. It's madhouse.game. So just type madhouse.game and that'll land you right on the Steam page. I would really appreciate any wish list and check out that demo or early access if you want to wait 2 weeks for an even better experience. And yeah, the Discord link for the Madhouse server should be on the Steam page, and I'd like to welcome all of you to join and get in on those multiplayer sessions with us. All right.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Oh.
Paul, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed the game immensely. Looking forward to releasing that video for you tomorrow on the YouTube channel, and really an invaluable experience hanging out with you this afternoon.
Yeah, you guys as well. Thanks. Like I said, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. Gave me, the opportunity to just talk about stuff that I don't usually get to talk about.
All right. Other than that, thank you everyone for listening. You've all been able to listen in with me, Pneumatics, Osak Kronos, Massac Gaming, and the amazing game dev behind Madhouse, Paul Humans. All right. So if you guys didn't know, we release episodes every Thursday at 5 a.m. Central Time, 6 a.m. Eastern. And we'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.
That's a wrap.
See you later.